You know, what happened during the Trump era was not a good season for evangelicals in the U.S. And I'll tell you why. They saw Trump as their proxy. They saw Trump as their opportunity to seize raw political power as Christians. And they jumped in, not all of them, but many of them jumped in behind them. And because the American public is divided 50-50 on their politics, what the church did was they alienated 50% of their constituency. Aren't we supposed to be reaching all people?
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
My message today is entitled A Biblical Guide to the Culture Wars. And the culture wars, in case you're not familiar with that term, has to do with the moral battles that rage underneath the surface in any society. And of course, you know what they are. They're abortion, they're gay rights, they're transgenderism, there's a definition of marriage, there's cancel culture, there's climate change, there's the redistribution of wealth. It's what's going on with the curriculum in the schools. If you lived south of the border, it's of course gun control and immigration. And thanks to COVID-19, we've added masks and vaccine mandates and a whole other host of good things. Aren't these a lot of fun, these culture wars? Well, whether they're fun or not, we have to learn how to deal with them, and that's what we're going to be talking about from a biblical perspective. But here's what's interesting about Christians. In fact, it's a little funny on one level, is that we always seem to be on the losing side of these culture wars. Have you noticed that? I've been in ministry 40 years, and I have been involved in the culture wars because I think there's a need for us to be involved with them. And I'll explain that in my message today. And I would say that I don't think I've won a single one of them. I think I've been on the losing side of every single one. We lost the abortion debate. We lost the definition of marriage debate. We lost the medically assisted suicide debate. We lost the legalizing of cannabis debate. We lost, a long time ago, Sunday shopping, and of course we lost the prayer in schools. We've lost every single debate in my 40 years of ministry. Now, I did see a bumper sticker the other day. It always encouraged me, and it says this: as long as there is exams, there will always be prayer in schools. so we always have the bumper stickers to hang on to. Actually, that's not my favorite story. Here's my favorite story. So there's this university class, big theater, dozens and dozens, hundreds of students. They're writing a final exam. The professor says this: when the buzzer goes, the exam is over. Every pen must be put down. If you do not stop writing at the buzzer, it's an automatic fail. So they're all writing the exam. The buzzer goes. Everybody puts down their pen. They come to the front. They hand in the exams, a big stack of exams. One guy just keeps on writing. He goes on for about another 30 or 40 seconds. He was almost done, so he wanted to finish. He comes rushing up. He says, "Sorry, professor, I was late." He said, "Were you not listening? I said, when the buzzer goes, it's an automatic fail. You've failed." To which the young man says to the professor, "Do you know who I am?" To which the professor says, "I have no idea." To which the young man says, "Good," and slips his paper right in the middle of the other one. Booyah! So again, my message is entitled The Biblical Guide to Culture Wars. And our text today is out of 1 Peter, and I'll tell you what I like about it. It's how to lose at the culture wars. I mean, it's sort of funny. I mean, Peter kind of assumes you're going to lose, and so here's how you do it. And so he gives us this advice because they're getting beaten up, the Christians, the early Christians. Peter writes this letter to them. It's fascinating. So here it is. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11 says this: "Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you will put to silence the ignorance of foolishness of men. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on there. First of all, he begins by saying this: look, you guys are just passing through. You're just sojourners. You're just pilgrims. So don't get too caught up in the earthly battle, because you may actually lose the earthly battle, which they were. The early Christians were treated with absolute contempt because of their lifestyle. They did not embrace the heathen gods. They did not view Caesar as divine. They had abandoned the Roman gods. In fact, here's an irony for you. Do you know that the Christians in the early church were called unbelievers? Because they didn't believe in Caesar and the Roman gods. They were the unbelievers. And anyway, they were getting really abused. They were getting mistreated, persecuted. They were getting thrown to the lions, all true stuff. In fact, here's what Peter says. If you keep reading, it's kind of funny. Because they were getting literally beaten for their faith. And he says to them, look, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, look, if you get beaten because of your bad behavior, that's on you, pal. But if you're getting beaten for doing good works, that's commendable to God. Really. So if I'm getting beaten up for my faith, that's a good thing? Yes, that is a good thing. Like that slogan on the pirate galley ship, the beatings will continue until morale improves, right? And so when we look at the culture wars, how are we going to fight the culture wars? How are we going to do this? Notice this, that my message is not how to win the culture wars. Did you notice that? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you 3 things that I find in the passage, and I've kind of packaged them my own way. But here they are, the biblical guide to culture wars. Number 1, you need to lay down your carnal weapons. Number 2, you need to live out your beliefs regardless of what the world is doing. And number 3, you need to let your conduct do the speaking for you. So we begin with this, that what we need to do is we need to lay down our carnal weapons. What does the scripture tell us? That your weapons of your warfare are not what? Carnal, but mighty in the Lord for the pulling down of strongholds. So we have to remember that our weapons are not primarily earthly or carnal. And that's what he's telling them here. When he says to them, don't let your fleshly lusts destroy or war against your soul, he's actually not talking about sexual immorality. He's actually talking about, don't let this resentment, don't let this hostility and this frustration get the best of you. Don't stoop to other people's level, is what he's saying. He says you can't fight their way. And see, a lot of times we do that. What we do is we take the bait. So let me tell you a little story about taking the bait that I know will amuse all of you. So when I was about 12 years old, I had these 2 guys, these 2 boys I walked home from school every day with. I wasn't in their class. I wasn't even in their grade. They were a year older than me. But we all lived on the same street, all 3 of us. We walked home together. And their names were Al and Sean. And Al was a real piece of work. And Al was a real mouthpiece. And we were walking home one day, and Al says to me, you know, Sean's the strongest guy in the school. You know, Sean could beat anybody up in this school. You know, Sean could beat you up. Why did I take the bait? Why did I take the bait? I say that now. And I say, I'm not sure he could. He says, you don't think you could? And I said, no, I don't think Sean could beat me up. He says, well, why don't you fight him and find out? Right? And so then he kept on me, and he kept on goading me into it. And so finally I said, okay, I'll fight him. But I want to set the rules. I just watched Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where Butch Cassidy was trying to set the rules for the knife fight. So I said, okay, I'll set the rules. There'll be no punching in the face, and then I'll fight him. Now, I understood, even at 12 years old, that one day I was going to be famous and standing before television cameras. And I need all these teeth. See those perfect white teeth? I mean, they didn't happen by accident. I kept people's fists off of them. Well, at least most of the time. So anyway, I said, okay, I'll fight you. I was imagining body blows like this, right? So I said, I'll fight him as long as there's no punching in the face. The whole time, Sean's not saying anything. Al's doing all the talking. So anyway, we held up our dukes like this. Guess what happened? Guess what happened? Hey, he sucker punched me right in the face. Boom, first punch right in the face. And by this time, we were right in front of our house. So I just ran in the house, and my lip was bleeding, and my teeth were sore and stuff. I wasn't very happy about it. So the next day, this will help some of you women understand the psychology of men, by the way. So the next day, I'm walking home from school with Al and Sean. It's what guys do, you know. By the next day, you're okay. And we're walking home from school, and Al starts going on about how Sean beat me up the day before, and how he's the strongest guy in the school, and how he beat me up. And I said, he didn't beat me up, he broke the rules. The rules were no punching in the face, he punched me right in the face. He says, he punched you in the face, and you ran into the house like a girl. And then he says, if you don't believe that, why don't you fight him again? Now, this is just going to reveal how stupid I really am. And so I said, I am like Charlie Brown with Lucy in the football. You all know that story. And I said, okay, I will fight him again as long as he doesn't punch me in the face. Right? You all following this? So he agreed. Al agreed, not Sean. Sean didn't say a word. So anyway, away we went again, like, pow! Second time in the face. Here's the thing about bullies that maybe you don't know. They don't keep the rules. They're goons for a reason. They don't keep the rules. And he punched me in the face the second time. This time he split my lip open and knocked both my front teeth loose. And they're just dangling, barely loose like this. I ran in the house. My parents were really mad at me. I had to go to the dentist and get an appliance to hold them in place while they healed. And if the dentist hadn't saved these teeth, you would not be standing before me. It was all of that dentist saved my bacon. I thought, I'm never letting anybody punch me in the face again. But the big question is this: I got goaded into something. I got tricked into something. I stooped to his level. And here's what happens when we begin to fight with the carnal weapons, the natural weapons, when we begin to fight the same way everybody else is, we're going to lose. So here's what I want to do. I want to describe the battles to you, the three battlegrounds as I see them. It's a bit of a metaphor, a bit of a parable. And here it is. I want to throw it up on the screen. So I want to talk about the cosmos, the climate, the weather, and then compare it to our battlefields. So if we were to look at the world, we all know what weather is. Weather blows in. It happens day by day. Weather changes how often? Every day? Every hour? You know, when we have an expression in Winnipeg, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute. Because you don't know what's going to happen, right? And weather is like that. Weather is very unpredictable. It comes and goes and whatever. But see, here's the thing about weather. It's actually not determined it doesn't determine itself. It's determined by the climate. And climate is far more important than weather. Because if you live in an arid climate, you're going to have arid weather. If you live in a rainforest climate, you're going to have rainy weather. Right? And so weather doesn't affect climate. Climate affects weather. Am I right about that? And that's why the climatologists, they don't worry about a bad snowstorm. They don't worry about a bad day of rain or a bad week of rain or even a bad month of rain. They worry about the overall climate. Now, there's something even higher and above that, and it's the cosmos. And it's the rotation of the Earth and the orbit of the sun, and it's the moon and the stars and the alignment. And God, in his infinite wisdom, has orchestrated the universe, the cosmos, in such a way that the planet Earth is the only place in the Milky Way that can sustain human life, because all of that hangs in the balance. And God did that. And so the cosmos affects the climate, and the climate affects the weather. Are you tracking with me so far? So here's where I want to go about these levels of warfare. Because, see, politics is like weather. It changes every day, doesn't it? Why do you have to watch the news every single night? Because whatever happened yesterday changed today. Politics is fleeting. It's ephemeral. It's there for a moment, and then it's gone, and it changes. And it doesn't matter how big of a scandal, just like weather. Like if you have a huge snowstorm, what do? We talk about it for 2 days, and then a week later, we've forgotten about it. Right? Huge rainstorm, huge thunderstorm. We talk about it for a couple of days and we forget about it. It's just momentary is what it is. And politics is the same way. And so something happens and we think it's the end of the world because something happened politically. Now climate is something at another level altogether, just as culture is. See, politics is affected by our culture. And our culture is affected by our spiritual cosmos. See, our battle, this is what he says, and I'll repeat it. He says, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but are mighty in the Lord for the pulling down of strongholds. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual hosts of wickedness, et cetera, et cetera. And you know the story, And so when we look at the world, we recognize this. We're not going to win all the earthly battles. So we need to be careful how we engage them, because the battle is really for the hearts and minds of individuals. And you cannot win it in the political arena. This is why Jesus ultimately stayed out of politics. They tried to drag him in. I'm telling you, they did. And I think the most famous story of them all is when they came up to Jesus, that was the Pharisees, and they said to him, "Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar?" Let me tell you why that was a political question. If he said, yes, it's lawful, then what he was doing is he was validating the Roman occupation of Israel, right? If he said, no, you don't have to pay taxes, then what he was doing was encouraging lawlessness and anarchy. So whatever answer he went with, he couldn't win. But you all remember what he did. Oh, Jesus is so smart. Don't you wish you were smart like Jesus? And Jesus pulls out a coin and he holds it up and he says, whose image is on the coin? And they said, Caesar's. And he said, then render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God's. What a beautiful answer. And that kind of wisdom and that kind of deftness is the kind of subtlety that we as Christians need to embrace, because we're not going to win this if we just strictly use the carnal weapons. And here's what a lot of people don't know, which is, I think, a great irony, is that Jesus was crucified as a political criminal. You say, why do you say that? Because that's what crucifixion was for. Do you think they were crucifying everybody? They didn't have the resources and time to crucify everybody. Crucifixion was something that was reserved for an example, a deterrent for people who were political insurrectionists. That's who it was reserved for. And they hung them up there in public daylight on the street corners so that people could say, this is what happens when you defy Rome. That was the whole point of crucifixions. And at Jesus' trial, what did they accuse him of? What was the question? Are you the king of the Jews? That's a political question. Because if you're the king of the Jews, then you are usurping the authority of the rightful king, who was Herod, right? And Jesus, once again, very smart, he said this. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. Had my kingdom, if it was of this world, my servants would fight. But my kingdom is not from here. Now, they crucified him anyway, but that's another story. The point was that he recognized where the battle was. He had to fight, which he was, by the way. The crucifixion was a spiritual victory, ultimately. We all know the rest of the story on that. But don't miss what I'm trying to say. They tried to drag him down to that level again and again and again. And as a result of that, had they done that, it would have diminished his message. See, let me give you an example about this. Some of you aren't going to like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, what happened during the Trump era was not a good season for evangelicals in the U.S. And I'll tell you why. They saw Trump as their proxy. They saw Trump as their opportunity to seize raw political power as Christians. And they jumped in, not all of them, but many of them jumped in behind them. And because the American public is divided 50-50 on their politics, what the church did was they alienated 50% of their constituency. Aren't we supposed to be reaching all people? Isn't that our job with the gospel? Don't we have to try to reach? And if we offend people, if they're disgusted and despise us, we're not going to be able to reach them. And I think that's what happened during that season, whether you like it or not. I think if you look at it, I don't think it was a good season for us. Now, if you're not clear on that, I want to give you another illustration. You're going to like this one. So let me just pause for a moment. I'm not dissing politics. I think Christians, in particular, on an individual basis, should go into politics. I think it's good if you want to join a political party. I think it's even better if you want to run for a political party. Because if our voice isn't around the table, we're not being heard. So it's a good place for you to be. And some of you are called to fight that political battle. But here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to wrap your faith and your politics together in an inextricable way that people can't tell the difference one from the other. And when you identify with a political party and your faith all as one thing, if they don't like your politics, they're not going to like your faith. Do you follow me on this? And here's my illustration I want to give you. It's a good one. So supposing I was selling used cars. Could you imagine me selling used cars? I'd be very good at it, thank you very much. But in order to sell lots of used cars, I want a good name. So I'm going to call my used car lot Jesus Christ Blessed Used Cars. I'm going to wrap my faith all around my used cars. Now, if I'm selling used cars that I call Jesus Christ Blessed Used Cars, is there a chance, like maybe it's a far chance, that someone might buy a lemon from me? Yeah, if I'm selling cars, they're all lemons. I mean, yeah, right? I mean, there's a good chance someone's going to get a lemon. And if I call them Jesus Christ Blessed Cars, guess what? They're not very blessed with Jesus Christ because his cars suck, right? And so that's what happens. We have to be careful what we do with our faith. We need to be, here, let me just land it with this. We need to be Christians first and everything else a distant second. How many are with me on this? So the first thing is this. The first thing, the big thing, is that we have to lay aside our carnal weapons. The second thing is that we have to live out our faith irrespective of what the rest of the world is doing. And when we look at what Peter was telling these Christians, he was saying, look, you got to live in an honorable way. And you got to do good. And no matter how badly you're mistreated and how they're holding you in contempt, you don't have an option here that your conduct's going to go a long way. And you have got to live out your faith. And if you don't live out your faith, you are compromising it, and you will never accomplish anything. Particularly the moderns today, they think Jesus was kind of come one, come all, you know, he accepted everybody just as they were. Those same people need to go read the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount is some pretty tough stuff. Talking about murder and about hatred and about anger and about adultery and about divorce and about vanity and about greed. It goes on and on and on and on. And he never soft soaps the moral requirements of a Christian. And so people don't understand that, I don't think, totally. And so they say, well, Jesus was so loving and compassionate. He just sort of overlooked people, and he knew people were flawed, and he just accepted everyone just as they were. That's not true that Jesus accepted everyone just as they were. He received everybody just as they were, but he never left them the same as when they came. Am I right about that? I'll give you the most famous example is the woman caught in adultery. So she's caught in the act of adultery, which means the guy was caught too, right? If it was in the act, But anyway, who knows where he is? And so she's out in the middle of the crowd. They all have stones. They're going to stone her to death. And so then Jesus realizes he wants to rescue this woman. And he says to this crowd, let he is without sin cast the first stone. And so all the men, they drop their stones and they walk away, and she's just left standing there. And he says to her, where are your accusers? And she says, there are none. To which he says, neither do I condemn you. Now, if you stop reading there, you've only read half the story. Because what is the very, very, very next line? Thank you. Go your way and sin no more. Go your way and sin no more. So he didn't accept her the way he was. He received her the way he was. But then he determined to try to help her change and become the woman that she was supposed to be. And I don't know, we don't know the end of the story, but I think there's a good chance that she never committed it again because she came within a whisker of losing her life, and Jesus rescued her. I believe that that person would have gone on because she had truth and love mixed together. And that was the secret to what Jesus did. Every one of us come to Jesus as flawed individuals. Every one of us. The scripture says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There are none righteous, no, not one. Every single one of us came to this church as broken people. Every last one. And we all have our hang-ups. We all have our hurts. We all have our things that are less than reputable. And some of you are sexual sin, and some of you it's, mental sin, and some of you it's relational sin, and some of you it's addictions, and some of you it's anger and hatred and greed and envy, and the list goes on and on. There's not a single perfect person in this place. And yet Jesus will receive us, but he will not leave us that way. So here's my promise to you. If you come to our church, we will welcome you with open arms, but you need to be ready, because every once in a while, there's a little bit of provocation from the pulpit as to how we ought to live. So the first thing is this, is that we need to lay aside our carnal weapons. And then we need to live out our faith Irrespective, regardless of what the world thinks of us, it doesn't matter. We have a responsibility. And then Peter goes on and he tells us that your conduct is what really matters. And so my third point is let your conduct do the speaking for you. And see, our words are not nearly as powerful as our actions. And that's what Peter is telling the early Christians. He says, look, they're going to see your good behavior. And by your good behavior and by your good works, you're going to silence their foolish ignorance. That's a strong statement because there is a lot of ignorant things about our world. But if you're telling people off, if you are combative, if you're antagonistic, if you are adversarial, who are you going to win to Christ? You're not going to accomplish it. Some of you might recognize the name Brian Stiller. And Brian Stiller was the president of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada in the 80s and 90s. He was also the editor-in-chief of Faith Today. He was in the pitched battle, the culture war for abortion in Canada. We were right in the middle of it. I was part of that. Brian came, he spoke in this church a couple of times. His adversary, the main sort of lightning rod of the other side of this debate, was Dr. Henry Morgentaler. Some of you will remember that name. And Dr. Morgentaler had set up 20 illegal clinics across Canada performing abortions. He had trained over 100 doctors to also perform these abortions. He went to prison twice because he was breaking the law, but he was willing and prepared to fight this right to the end. And so this battle was going on, and Kathy and I were having dinner one night with Brian Stiller, and he told us this story that I don't think is out there, but I'm going to tell you because I can't keep a secret. And he decided that he needed to understand, empathize with his adversary. And so he decided to take Dr. Morgentaler for dinner. And the two of them sat down for dinner, and he thought, I need to know this man. I need to humanize this man. This man, on a political and cultural level, is my adversary, but he's also someone that the Bible tells me what. The Bible says this. It says to love your enemies, overcome evil with good. It says, bless those who curse you. It says, do good to those who hate you. These people are not our adversaries, right? And so he recognized that, so he sat down with this man, he asked him to hear his story, and his story blew him away. Because what he didn't know at the time was that Dr. Henry Morgentaler was a Holocaust survivor who had spent 5 years in the concentrations of Dachau and Auschwitz. And he had seen all the atrocities of the Nazis, and then he said this in the midst of the conversation. He said, I believe that the greatest evil is to take the life of another human being. And Brian Stiller was thinking to himself, what? There's a great incongruence here on this. Like, isn't that what you do, taking the life of the unborn? And then he went on, and what he did was he compared the Gestapo's taking people and putting them into concentration camps to what our political system was doing to women and saying they had to carry a baby to term even though they didn't want to. So that was his comparison in his mind. And here's what he recognized. He realized this man that he thought was living out abject evil actually thought he was doing the right thing, actually thought what he was doing was a good thing and a righteous thing and a noble thing. And of course, in 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada agreed with him. And in 2008, they awarded him the Order of Canada, the highest civilian award in Canada. Here's the picture of it here in 2008. But it went a long way to helping Brian Stiller understand the humanity of this man that he was dealing with. And even though he didn't agree with him, I don't agree with him, we have to recognize this, that we have a responsibility to the people around us to love them whether we feel like hating them or not. Because it's not them we hate, it's their ideas we hate, right? So let me just close with this one final thought, is that we have to be engaging this world. And not in a combative and an antagonistic and adversarial way. And Jesus was friends with sinners. He was friends with the tax collectors, and he was friends with the prostitutes, and he was friends with all of these people that they called him a friend of sinners. And he didn't beat them over the head, telling them what they were doing was wrong. What he did was he just engaged them in their life and loved with these people. And see, this is our job, people. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're mighty in the Lord for the pulling down of strongholds. We might lose the earthly cultural battles, but we're going to win the heavenly battle, and that's the one that matters. Let's stand together.
If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.